I think teaching is all about thresholds. It's about getting students to the next level or through a new door, opening a new door for them, and feedback is the key to that part of the learning process. I'm Dominic McHugh, Senior Lecturer in Musicology in the Department of Music, where I teach courses on the history of classical music and also the Broadway musical, and I'm also the Director of Performance in the department, so I look after all the performance-related activities. I won 3 awards for teaching, including one for Best Feedback, so I'm here to talk about my philosophy of teaching, particularly as it relates to the feedback process. My philosophy towards feedback is that it's a psychological process and that we have to start by assessing the student's state of mind, and that always means that in most cases they care about their marks, they care about their work, and therefore receiving feedback is a really anxious process for them. And once we realise and acknowledge that, it allows us to give them useful feedback in the right kind of way. So when I'm writing feedback, I always start by describing the ways in which they've hit the criteria for whichever boundary they're in, and then I point out ways in which they've been particularly strong, things that they've done particularly well. And then I move from there into areas where they could have improved. But I see it as areas to get better rather than areas where they failed. And throughout my feedback, I try to mix some positive comments with some criticisms and seeing it as critique rather than criticism, really. So I try to say, you did this well, and in order to do even better, you could have done this. Or you seem to have tried to do this, but here is how you could have solved it. The other thing I try to do is to think about the whole range of learners. I think it's very easy when we're marking huge quantities of work to be attracted to the positive students and just give them praise, and to give the weaker students negative feedback. I see it as particularly important to give the stronger students criticisms too, because if we just say you did very well, you get 72, that's a first, then they think that we haven't really engaged with what they've done, and they're going to want to know what they could have done to get the other 28 marks that they didn't get. So we have to always provide them with that stimulation. I see all feedback really as feed forward. Even if it's final year work at the very end of their degree, we want them to continue to develop as people when they leave university, and that means giving them things to strive for and to think about going forward. And so they need to know what their strengths are, and they need to know how they can improve. I think the ultimate goal of feedback is to provide students with the critical skills that they need not only to deal with the world, but to grow in life. And it may be that they leave our music degree and become lawyers, or go into a completely different profession, and that doesn't bother me at all. But bearing that in mind, and bearing in mind that not all of them will go into music, we have to think about equipping them with skills and not just equipping them with knowledge of music history, for example. And therefore, for me, it's about honing those critical skills, making them more aware of themselves, making them aware of what they can celebrate in their achievements, and making them aware of what they need to do to fully achieve their potential in life. The most challenging thing in giving feedback is providing that balance between celebrating and critiquing, and if the work is really bad, then it can be difficult to celebrate the positives because there might not be any or many, and the work might be bad because the student has been lazy, and therefore it's hard sometimes to remain patient when you're marking 100, 200 pieces of work to take a poor piece of work seriously when we can sense that it's the result of laziness. But even in that situation, we have to try and think about being inspirational, about turning people's lives around, and it can turn someone's life around to say, if you hadn't been lazy, you could have done it a lot better. And even lazy students, if you point out the things that they've done in their work that show that they're intelligent or show that they have talent, and you say, look what you could have done with this if you'd applied yourself a bit more, then that can help them to engage going forward. And then the other challenge, I think, is to be consistent across the grade boundaries. So whether it's a strong or weak student, always giving them the same kind of feedback, being consistent, always thinking about what to suggest. And sometimes when it's a very good piece of work, it can be challenging to think, well, how could they have made it better? What could they have done? The most useful thing about giving feedback is it's part of the teaching process, and I think sometimes staff don't realise that. They think that the teaching happens in the classroom and that's the end of their input. In actual fact, feedback is part of triangulating the process of teaching and learning. It's about pointing out what they have understood, it's about pointing out what they have not understood, and it's about gaining information for ourselves. If you see that students are consistently across a class making the same mistakes, then it tells us what we should be dealing with more, or indeed at all, in future iterations of that module or other modules. It makes us realise what's not obvious to students. Very often for me, I read a class's work and think, goodness me, I really need to deal with a certain issue better in the future. My preference, although it's difficult to deliver, is to have drafts of work submitted to me about halfway through the semester, give them quite detailed feedback at that point, and then at the end of the semester have them hand in the work, having spent several more weeks working on it. That's a very personal philosophy of how it should work. It's not always practical when dealing with large groups of students, so sometimes I have to replace that with group tutorials where students come and present their work for a few minutes, and then I give them the feedback like that, and then they help each other. The one thing I would say to colleagues who aren't sure about giving feedback is to think, once you've written your feedback, how would this come across if you were receiving it? And of course, students are different, everyone receives things differently, but if you've written your feedback in a sufficiently tight and structured way, then it will always be acceptable and professional. But if you've not given enough criticism, or if you've given too much criticism, or you've not been informative enough or not specific enough, then you're leaving yourself open to criticism from the students in return, which then creates resentment. So it's about reflecting on what you've written and thinking not just what you have intended to write, but does that come across in what you've written and what you're giving back to the students.